I've been saying right from the beginning, Ukraine will win this war of aggression that Russia has begun against Ukraine. The question is, at what cost? Will it be at the cost of 10,000? Will it be at the cost of 50,000? Will it be at a cost of 100,000 Ukrainians? And this is why it's imperative that the West finally act in ways that will change Putin's calculus. Ukraine will win this. And as I've said right from the beginning, the first time that people have died for the values of the European Union while carrying the flag of the European Union occurred in Ukraine. Ukrainians died carrying the European Union flag during the Maidan. Today, and I've said it from the beginning, it's Ukrainian volunteers who are acting as a shield for NATO. NATO, the alliance that's supposed to be the shield for democracies, an alliance of countries that subscribe to a set of values. Lester B. Pearson was one of the originators of this concept of NATO. And it was to be a shield for these nascent democracies after World War II in Europe, to help them nurture and to grow those roots of liberal democracies, to prevent the sort of horrors we saw in World War II. Today, that shield is being shielded by volunteer battalions with weapons that are several generations behind the weaponry that Russia has brought in with Russian troops into Ukraine. Ukraine will win this war because the truth is on the side of Ukraine. And I've said this starting from the spring. The question is, at what cost? And part of our responsibility as a diaspora is to finally make these Western politicians understand enough of saying the right things in all the right forums. It's a simple calculus when it comes to Putin. Hit him hard, it's got to hurt. Everyone's talked about SWIFT. Why hasn't it been done? What's this loophole that allows them to roll over their debt, their corporate debt, their banking debts, over 90 days? Shut it down. Shut their economy down. Put a tax, a substantive tax, to help pay for the costs that Ukraine has absorbed because of this Russian war against Ukraine on Russian exports of oil and gas. The calculations can be made. It's time to start taxing Russia on that. I think all Ukrainian Canadians and Ukrainians everywhere in the diaspora, and of course in Ukraine, it's gut-wrenching watching our soldiers die unnecessarily, watching civilians die and suffer unnecessarily. Those soldiers went to the front. Let's supply them with arms. I spoke with a Canadian volunteer. We had a debrief, a long debrief. And I've spoken with him a number of times, beginning when he was first leaving for Luhansk. And it's clear how Russia has changed her tactics through this whole process. He was at Luhansk airport. When they pulled back from Luhansk airport, there were a couple villages outside of Luhansk airport that were initially attacked by Russian infantry. They fought them off, and there were pretty significant losses. Then they used tanks. They fought off the tanks. There was some incredible heroics. People, because they didn't have the weaponry, volunteers basically go across fields to attack the tanks. So what did the Russians do? They brought in the multiple rocket launching systems, and for 2 days they pounded those villages into nothing. They exist on a map as dots. They no longer exist. He explained what sort of technology Russia's brought. They've brought their most modern technology. Sometimes 2 to 4 days there would be no communications. All their communications was being jammed. Cell phones, radios. So they'd have to ask for volunteers to go back to command, to give reports, and to find out what's happening. There was no communications. People would be bunkered with no communications with the outside. On the front, what they're now having to do, because Russia has put in emplacements virtually every kilometer along the front, this land radar system. Nobody can sneak through. They see everything. And what do? Heavy artillery. There are ways to counter that heavy artillery. There are ways to counter all of that communications jamming that happens. The West has the equipment. We've repeated it over and over. And, you know, we're Canadians. Let's repeat it to Mr. Harper. Enough with these piecemeal sanctions. Make it count. Supply. Canada has always taken a lead. We were the first Western country to acknowledge Ukraine's independence after a referendum. We were the country that came up with this concept, Canada Corps, 500 electoral observers during the Orange Revolution, the first Western country that ever engaged directly with their citizenry to send such a huge contingent. Canada has the opportunity to show leadership and to provide the sort of military equipment that's required, and the advisors. Send the advisors, send the equipment. Let's not do a calculation that, okay, once it hits 50,000, is that what the politicians are waiting for? You know, it's horrific to think in those terms. How many dead do you need? How many of these volunteer soldiers? That's the only thing that stopped Putin. He'd be in Kiev today if not for these volunteer battalions. That's Putin's greatest miscalculation. Every time, whether it was the Orange Revolution, the Maidan, or this war, he's hit the hard reality of Ukraine's spirit, wanting, longing for freedom. And I've spoken with so many, starting with Maidan, so many of these young men, and there's a theme that runs through what they say. In different ways they word it, but the theme is, I'd rather die a free man than to live as a slave. There's a new generation of Ukrainians, and they will fight. Putin will lose. It's up for the West to step forward and take the actions that will limit the human suffering and the loss of life.